Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy week to come for our coaches bocce training. So tonight I have Rennie, who is going to be your actual trainer because he's the expert in the sport. So with that, Rennie, take it away.
Well, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I imagine that most of you probably already know me. For those of you that don't know me, I am the head coach for Montgomery County. I've been active in Special Olympics bocce now well over 10 years. I can't quite remember exactly the years. I had the distinct pleasure a few years ago of being selected to be one of the bocce coaches for Team USA when we went to Greece, to Athens. So that was an awful lot of fun. And I continue to have fun with the sports. Of all the sports that I coach, this is the one that I enjoy the most. The other thing I want to make sure for tonight is I like to be able to hear questions from folks or see questions. So, Kendall, if the folks want to ask questions, can they type the questions in? And if you could send it, I would greatly appreciate it. And let me know.
Most definitely. And also, if you raise your hand, that allows us to unmute your line. So whichever way you would rather have the questions come in, I can do both.
Right. Okay. Yep. Don't hesitate as I go through this, folks. Interrupt me. There is no such thing as interrupting me during these presentations. Thank you. And then we'll go ahead and get going. There's a few things that I want to do tonight. First, I'm going to give you a very brief summary of the rules. I'm not going to sit there and read you page after pages. You can do that just as well on your own. We will talk about training consideration and equipment, and if you've got suggestions, what works with your team, please speak up, share that with everybody, and then we'll go into a divisioning process that I've developed and that I use very effectively for my team. So I'm going to give away a lot of secrets there as to how I division or how I actually do the scoring to turn in the scores for the divisioning process. And you'll see that it will allow you to be a better coach and to better put together teams and to work with your different athletes. Please note on the rule summary that if there's any question, this isn't right, this doesn't sound right, we always go back to what Kendall presents during the webinars. Those are the final say as to what governs the rules of the game. Everybody is aware that we are playing on courts that are 60 feet long and 12 feet wide with 2 foul lines and a mid-court line. Everybody knows we always have 4 balls and a Polina. Length of the game, it's 12 points, 16 points if it doubles, unified competition, or teams, and etc. We also typically try to do limit a game to 30 to 40 minutes. I've seen it done down to 20 minutes. It gets real short. My recommendation during practices is if you could go to 12 and just let the athletes have fun, it absolutely makes the most sense. But if it looks like it's not going to get anywhere and you need to move players around, then absolutely pick a nice round number. 30 minutes is usually a good number to pick. You know, everybody knows the 4 green balls is one side, the red balls are on the other side. Sorry about that. To start the games and stuff, what I find at practices is that the athletes really appreciate being able to either flip a coin or select when you flip the coin, or what we'll do is we'll put one hand behind our back and say, pick a number 1 to 5. For those athletes who can't figure it out in the beginning, it doesn't take long for them to figure out. You're asking them to pick a number 1 to 5, and they pick a number, and whoever gets the closest to your finger count wins, and they're more than happy to play that game. We do find that athletes tend to underthrow or overthrow the Polina quite a bit. This past weekend, I ran into with one team that I was working with, where after 3 throws, they couldn't get it across the midline. So it kind of surprised them when I enforced this rule during practice and said, nope, now you got to give the ball to the other team. And boy, that next round, when that person had an opportunity, they knew where to throw it. They had figured it out. Sequence of play. I've seen all kinds of things happen around a sequence of play, and many, many times during competitions, I've seen the official impose enough that every athlete has to alternate going through when they play. That is incorrect. If you've got doubles, so you've got 2 members on a team, and each member has to throw 2 balls, there's nothing in the rules that says how those 2 athletes throw their balls. In other words, what I'm trying to say here is, let's say that the red ball is in and it's now green's turn to play. One of the green player gets up and he throws his ball. The green ball does not get closer than the red ball. So at that point, you have a choice. That athlete who just threw a green ball, assuming they still have another green ball to throw, they can go ahead and throw it, or they can sit down and let the other team member get up and pick up their green ball and throw it and try again. Typically, I strongly recommend that if your athletes can handle the unorganized way of doing it, and if it's not really systematic in that I throw 1 ball, I sit down, the other person comes up, they throw 1 ball, I get back up and throw my second ball. If they can handle having things changing around themselves, let them throw 2 balls in a row. The big reason for that, I have observed athletes after athletes, they throw that first ball and they miss it. They get too far, too short. They get back an opportunity to throw again that second ball. And before you know it, that athlete gets a lot closer to the Polina on that second shot. That's why I encourage my athletes who can handle the little bit of disorganization like that to go ahead and throw 2 balls in a row. Some athletes handle it perfectly, other athletes not. You better put it as alternating. But don't let the officials at the competition drive that decision. That's a decision that you're making during practices with your athletes, and you're teaching your athletes what makes sense for them. So, and if you see it at competition, don't hesitate to speak up to the referee and say, hey, that's not the way we do it. And it makes a big difference sometimes in the way things are. Any questions so far? I know I'm going through a lot of these rules really quickly.
I have not received any questions yet.
So, again, here's where, on the strategy of the game, I say that no rule requires that the team must alternate players when the balls are thrown. Okay, so that I went over that. It's very important if you can do that. The other thing that we in Montgomery County try to teach our athletes is at the end of the game, when you're sitting there with 1 ball or maybe even 2 balls in your hands, And this is the last frame, and you've won the entire game. Okay? We're teaching our athlete, drop the balls. Don't throw the balls down the center. Just drop the balls right there, because now that's a guarantee for you to win the game. How many times have we seen where somebody at the end, they're winning, they're ahead by 1 point or 2 points, and they throw that last ball down, and they knocked all the balls all over the place. And the next thing you know, the other team is now ahead by 1 point or has tied the games or something like that. So, again, not all athletes are going to learn that trick. I'll tell you that ahead of time. Some athletes are really good about doing that, and that's what makes it fun, is when you can get across that. It's a very difficult concept, I'll tell you that. It took a long time for some of our athletes to get it, and really what happened is that one athlete got it, and he started doing it, and the next thing you know, it was like a domino effect through the rest of our team. Now we've got probably 25% of our team that understands that concept and actually apply it in competition. Again, on the scoring, only one team can score at a time. You get a point for every ball that's the closest to the Polina as compared to your opponents. So if we were to go to this chart here, you'd have 2 reds that score points, and then the greens are then closer than the other 2 reds. Therefore, it's 2 points for red and no points for green. The other thing, too, that I want to mention, when you finish scoring and everything, another thing that I often see in competition is the winning team obviously gets the Polina and gets to throw out the Polina again. But oftentimes the officials will hand the ball and alternate between players. There's no rule that says you have to alternate players on teams. You can designate, as the coach, you can designate the same person to always throw the Polina out. And you can designate just as easily the same person to always throw the last ball for that team. And as a matter of fact, that was one of the things that we did when we went to Athens for the World Games. As coaches for Team USA, we looked at our athletes, and the courts were so fast that we had to make sure that the person who was throwing out the Polina first had good control of the Polina, and so did not throw the Polina down too far. And so in some cases, not all of the doubles team, but on many of the doubles team, we had one person, and even on the 4-man teams, we had one person that was designated to always throw the Polina out first. And then we would have sometimes always the same person throw that last ball out. And in some cases, we would even pick a first player to throw the Polina, to throw the first ball, not necessarily if the other team threw the Polina out, then somebody else, and we had taught them how to send a blocker down so that they were always short of the Polina. So we use those kinds of strategy. If you watched the Winter Games and the curling games, look at some of the things that they talked about during the curling matches and stuff, and you can find that most of those concepts of the different strategy you can bring back into Special Olympics bocce. Putting a blocker out there, knocking a ball out of the way, things like that. They're all valid at this time. Legal throws. Players are always supposed to throw balls underhanded delivery. It's preferable that they do it with one hand, and it has to be done. They've got to release that ball before their hand gets up higher than their waist or their belt, whichever one you want to label that. The reason we say with one hand, because it's easier to control with one hand, and it gives you a better throw. However, there are many, many players in Special Olympics that can't do one hand, and they got to do both hands. So for those athletes, absolutely, spend some time, practice with them to hold that, and for them to swing that ball between their legs and everything else. For those athletes requiring ramps, ramps are now starting to be introduced in Special Olympics Maryland. So please work with us, work with Kendall on working, have those athletes present during the summer games. We would love to have them also at competition, at qualifiers and things like that.
Hey, Rennie, I have a question from Anthony Tate. Anthony, I'm about to unmute your line. All right, I believe it's unmuted now.
Anthony, go ahead.
Rennie, how you doing?
All right, how about you?
We're just hanging in there. Busy day. We were always taught, and as the rules specify, as long as the delivery, doesn't go past the waistline, that you can deliver it overhand or underhand.
It all depends on how what you mean by overhand versus underhand. I think here there's
releasing the ball from the upside or the downside of the palm. Either way.
Yeah, and I do that the same thing, and I would define it the same way. So if the intention here was to say that it had with the palm side up or the palm side down, it really doesn't matter to me. To me, that underhand delivery is the hand stays under the waist, is the way I interpret what's written here.
All right, that's what I just wanted to clarify to make sure I was reading it properly.
Yeah, to me, if I was to throw it from my shoulder height on, that's overhanded. That's how I interpret what they put in there.
I agree. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Next item is, and this is a tricky one, folks, because I can tell you that during competition, athletes will step on that foul line. We got to make sure that the athletes are always behind the foul line. So if you can at practices or at your qualifiers, make sure that there's a good, solid line so that the athletes get used to not going past that foul line. If they're in a wheelchair, if they're using a ramp or anything like that, if they've got crutches, all those things have to be behind the foul line. Nothing can be past the foul line. When it comes to, for us, and the athlete throws their ball in, it bounces off of the side or the backboard, they're all legal. If the ball rolls down and hits other ball, great, because that's all part of the game. The only time we'll call a foul on those things is if a ball leaves the court. Then there are decisions that have to be made about what do you do? Do you put the balls back in? Do you try to resequence the ball? Definitely, if an athlete throws a ball out of turn, you try to stop the ball, but don't get yourself endangered. Obviously, if the ball is going to hurt you, you don't want to try to stop it. But once the ball has hit and has come to a stop, then put the balls back as best as you can and take the ball that was thrown illegally back out. And that's a foul ball. We're not going to use that. If the Polina gets hit and bounces out of the court, that's a dead frame, folks. You start the whole frame over again. If a ball gets hit and it gets bounced outside of the court, that ball is now a dead ball. And you don't put it back into play. That's just part of the game. Measuring, what I really strongly recommend there is, folks, get used to measuring. You take your metal tape, your ruler, whatever you want to use, and start the loose end should be up against the bocce ball, and you then draw the tape over the Polina, and you look for the center of the Polina, and that's your measurement. Now, one of the other things that was done extensively, but now it's getting harder to do for those of us that still remember the rabbit ears antennas on television. So if you can ever find in a flea market rabbit ears for TVs, don't hesitate. Get a pair of those, and you can extend those rabbit ears, and you could use that as a big compass to stretch out and figure out which balls are closest to it. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, say something here, because I know that Luch's dad, Luch was the head coach from Montgomery County before I became head coach. His dad was a good old little Italian. He loved playing bocce, and that's what he had in his back pocket, a set of rabbit ears, and he was constantly using them to measure during practice. Coaching. I've got a really strong philosophy about this, and my feeling is during practice, I spent the whole time coaching my athletes, giving them tips, telling them where to send the ball, where not to do it. And sometimes I take a ball back and say, hey guys, let's try this again, but let's throw it from this angle and things like that. And I'll do that for a lot of the practices, and then sometimes I'll just go quiet and let them play. But when my athlete gets to qualifiers, but especially when they get to summer games, I stop coaching completely. I figured if I haven't done my job by now of coaching those athletes, it's too late. Most of those athletes aren't going to be able to do that. I may go just prior to the start of a match and might remind an athlete that, hey, remember, this is a very fast court, or this is a slow court, or you got a bumpy court, or you got a court that rolls to the right or to the left. And I might tell them, I says, pay attention to that and give them a few pointers. But beyond that, I try as much as possible not to give them any coaching tips during the competition. I let them go out there and have fun and do the best that they can. If they got teammates and stuff, I'll look at the two guys or the two ladies ahead of time and say, talk to each other. Go back and forth. One of you can walk down and take a look at things and come back and give some advice and stuff. Some teams can do it. Others teams, forget it. That's not going to work. But don't hesitate to use that to your advantage. We've now got, when it comes to athletes with visual disability, we've got 2 athletes in Montgomery County that are visually disabled. One of them is essentially completely blind. Even the doctors aren't sure what he can see or can't see. The best they can think is he might be able to see sometime white light. That particular athlete, the way we've worked it for years now, is somebody stands, we get one of the officials, to stand over the Polina and say to the athlete, Ben, I'm right here. I'm standing over the Polina. And Ben then shoots based on what he's hearing. Now, if Ben misses it really bad, or we ask the officials to explain to Ben where his ball went so that Ben can adjust. For those of you who aren't aware of it, Ben will be one of the athletes representing Maryland at the national games, at the next national games in Bocce. So you can see being blind for him has not been that much of a handicap. And then we have another athlete who eyesight has been getting progressively worse. So what we've done is I've gotten a bright colored noodle. You know those floaties that everybody has at the swimming pool and stuff? I took that noodle and stuck a broomstick right down the middle. And it's in there just tight enough to make that noodle nice and firm. And we place that broomstick, or we ask the officials to put that broomstick right behind the Polina. And then Alex just takes aim for that noodle. And it doesn't matter how tall the grass is. It doesn't matter what color the balls are, or the fact that he can't see the Polina really well. He's got that noodle that's standing right behind that the Polina. So he's back to being like everybody else. And that's really the important thing. In both cases, what we try to strive is we're not trying to give any advantages to the athlete. We're just trying to allow them to be on an equal playing field. So as you're going through your season, learn who your athletes are and figure out what works for them and what doesn't work for them, and bring that to the state games. But more importantly, make sure that the person who's entering the information in GMS also enters the special accommodation that you need, because then Kendall and the rest of the team can take that into account when they do their divisioning. Uniform requirements, I'm not going to go over that. The basic thing to remember, no sandals and no t-shirts at competition. Training consideration. When I come to training session every week, the first thing I do is I take attendance. And I do it for two reasons. One, I'd like to know who's there so that I can divide up the team. But the most important part that I have found, and that I've gotten feedback from many, many parents on this, is I make eye contact with every single athlete. I call out their name and I look at them, and sometimes I'll say something to them. So I acknowledge every single athlete at every single practice. And for some athletes, it's the most important thing that can happen to them, because now the coach has paid attention to them and them only for that brief time that it just takes me to call out their name and do that. Warm-up activities, sometimes we do it, sometimes we don't. Most of the time, what I try to do is divide up the team as quickly as possible. At the beginning of the season, I just look at athletes and say, okay, I'm going to put my 4 best players together. And it's done randomly. I tell the person who's going to be on that court, arrange them in team however you want. I don't have a particular importance to it. And then I'll keep just going down in the expertise of the athletes. The brand new athletes, we had 8 athletes that were brand new to the team this past Saturday. I took all 8 of those and put them on one court, and we started playing bocce with them, trying to understand what they knew and what they didn't. It quickly became obvious that 4 of them were ready to really play bocce, knew enough about the rules and the concept of the game that I peeled off 4 of those and went and started playing with those 4. The other 4s had to continue to be taught the game of bocce and stuff. And so that's what I do. And so, when it comes to practices, I'm pretty rigid when it comes to athletes showing up on time. Because when I do that divisioning, if somebody comes in later, then I got to stop and I got to redo the divisioning, and put people into different groups. And I've told parents, I says, you come in late, you may have to wait a half an hour before your athletes can play, or to the counselors when it's a group home, because it says, I'm not going to stop practice and redo everything because you're late. And then during that half hour while everybody is playing, I'll start to mentally reorganize things. And at the break, I'll tell people, okay, here are all the changes that I'm going down. During the actual practice and stuff, on the skills instructions, depending on the level of the athletes and stuff, we may place the Polina in some cases. Some athletes don't know how to play when the Polina is up against the board. So we'll place the Polina against the board, and we'll work with them on how to knock the Polina away or knock the balls that are blocking it away from there. And we'll try those kinds of variations. We'll put it in the middle. We'll put it all the way down at the far end and try to make them work that way. Or we'll make a very short court right at the middle. So we try to challenge athletes depending on where we think that they need. I bring a lot of that back, and I'll change things on them after the first competition, because I will have observed them during competition, say, okay, where's their strength, where's their weaknesses? And I'll try to work on those, either build their strength up even more or work with them through their weaknesses. So as I was saying, short Polina, long Polina, Polina up against the rails, bank shots. We've done that too. Defensive rules, that's what I was talking about before. Blocking. Offensive rules, target shots, knocking balls away and stuff. So some athletes, this works brilliantly for. Other athletes, folks, be prepared. It's not going to work. There isn't the one thing that I love about this population is that you can't have one rule that applies across everybody when it comes to training these things that I'm showing here. Some athletes get it and some don't. The ones that don't get it, they don't get it today, but they may get it next week. If they don't get it next week, it might not be until next year. And if not next year, it might not be until the year after. That doesn't matter. I don't care. I love this population, and I love playing with the fact that sooner or later, that light comes on, and it's the greatest satisfaction that I get when that big light comes on and I see an athlete has just reached a new height and understanding of what the game is all about. Training, and on the variety of surfaces. One of the things that when I first joined Montgomery County Bocce, we were doing it almost exclusively on grass. And then we got the opportunity to go to a retirement center from the county, and they had 2 clay courts. And so for a long time, we were just practicing on that. And then what would happen is we'd go to the state games, and it was back on grass. Or we go to the qualifier, and it was back on grass. And those 2 clay courts are covered, so they're absolutely wonderful. If it's pouring rain, we still have practice because we're under the roof, and everybody gets to play. Maybe not as much because there's only 2 courts. But what I've done is I've built 6 courts, and those 6 courts get, I actually spread them out. So if I was to take 1 court and I split it in such a way that it really looks like a big S, instead of being a big rectangular, I've taken 1 side and flipped it to the other side. So athletes are now playing on half court, but because there's another half court next to it, it becomes really easy to have full length court. And so those 6 courts that I have, we're turning it into 12 courts. And so we are playing quite well with that, with our athletes. How do I do my courts? Well, I didn't want to go to the big pipes like the state has. So I take 1.5 inch or 1.25 inch PVC pipe. And I bought the 10-foot length. I cut them in 5-foot length. And then inside of each pipe, at one end, I put in an 18-inch long 1-inch pipe. And it just slides into that first pipe. And then I put a little screw in there to hold that pipe so it doesn't slide back out. And I use that to put the pipes together and to make the 60 by 12. Now, obviously, for the 12-foot sections at the end, if you take a 10-foot and you cut it in half, you still don't have 12. So there, I've got a 2-foot section of 1.25 inch pipe. Any questions on that? You want to see what it looks like? Drop an email to me, folks. I'll gladly make pictures for you. For those of you that have been to the state games, it essentially looks like what the state has for their courts. The only difference is it's a smaller pipe. It's not as heavy to move around. It doesn't take as much space. And it's real quick to get in and out of the back of my pickup truck. Any questions so far? Let me go on to the scoring then. This is something that I put together. As everybody knows, the state has to division everybody based on a score that they receive. So what I did is I created this divisioning sheet years ago. And I actually have it in a spreadsheet, and I'll show you in a minute what it looks like. But essentially, the requirement is we've got to have the top 3, or we have to have 3 measurements at 30 feet. So 1, 2, and 3. 3 measurements at 40 feet, 3 measurements at 50 feet, and that then gives you a score in inches that we then turn in for the divisioning. What I do is I actually tell the athlete, I want you to throw all 8 balls, which is what we're supposed to do, but I measure every single ball. And then and then I do some math on either of them, and I'll show you in a minute. And I do that for all of them. By the way, be prepared that some athlete, by the time they get to the 50-foot thing and they're throwing that last 8 balls, they may be very tired. So keep that in mind. You might have to give them a break and stuff, because that's a lot of throwing, and some athletes are just not prepared for that. So now if I go to my score, there we go. So here's a score that I had for Owen, and you can see it's way back in 2008 that I do it. And it's not every single year, but at least every other year, or mandatory within my team, every 3 years, all of my athletes get checked out. And I check them out or rescore them if at the beginning of the season I realize, wait a minute, something has changed with this athlete. I really need to rescore, because either he's gotten a lot better or he's gotten a lot worse. And I need to have a new score so he can be properly divisioned. And so if you look at this, and I'll gladly share this spreadsheet with anybody who wants it. I have no problem sharing it. If you look at this, you can see that I'm looking at the scores, the top 3 scores from the 30 feet, the 40 feet, and the 50 feet. So one of the things that I do when I run the practice and they throw the 8 balls, I always try to measure them in the order of the closest ball to the furthest ball away from the Polina. Remember that if an athlete hits the Polina when they're throwing the balls, you have to put the Polina back in the center. You don't touch any of the balls. You just take the Polina and you put it back where it was for that particular series. Then, when it's all over and done with, not only do I have my score here that's automatically calculated that I can turn in to the state or to the other qualifiers, but I also have this number down here. And that number becomes useful information to me because that's telling me how this athlete does over the different distance. Are they staying accurate or are they getting less and less accurate? Here's one where this athlete was staying closer than the one I was showing you before. His spread from the 30 feet and the 50 feet are much closer. So this athlete has the strength to do the 50 feet throws and still be fairly accurate as on the 30 feet. On the 40, he might have not been paying that much attention. But that then becomes important for me because what I'm doing at that point, folks, and I'd recommend that you do, is you look at it and you say, okay, it's now time for me to pair athletes together. Well, if I've got an athlete that's like this one, where at 30 feet, she's got 51, at 40 feet, 57. Now we know that this athlete, both on the short and the medium, stays about the same accuracy. But when it got to 50 feet, it jumped to 121. That's telling me this athlete is not very good at throwing that far. And he is getting really inaccurate because she's got to throw so hard, she loses her accuracy. So, and then I can also look at the data here, because in some cases I've seen it where, for instance, this athlete again is fairly good on the 30 feet. On the 40 feet, it's gotten a little worse, but on the 50 feet, you're looking at these numbers and says, wait a minute, they're not much better than the 40 feet. This athlete isn't really capable of getting that close. And all these balls were short of the 50 feet. And then I use that knowledge to then form my teams. Do I put athletes that are in similar situation, or do I put an athlete that's always throwing short with an athlete that can throw long? How do I match them? So those are the kinds of things that we do here in Montgomery County. And that's what I had to cover. And at this point, let's go ahead and open it up and have folks ask questions, make comments. What works for you? What have you seen that works for your team? Don't be shy, folks. Really. You're making me think I've been talking on mute all this time.
If anyone has a question or a comment or wants to share anything, you just have to raise your hand and I can unmute your line. Oh, we have one. William Connolly, I just opened your line.
Yeah, Rennie, it's Jeff. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, the one question I always had in when we're in tournaments is the officials when they measure. Is it up to the athlete to ask for a measurement, or the idea is if you're going to drop a ball at the end, knowing you're ahead, to make sure he's aware they're ahead and by how much or behind. I mean, the coach can't get involved with that, correct?
The coach should not get involved in it. Unfortunately, I see it happen many times. The athletes can ask for a measurement if they're not sure. Now, most of the time what we find is that the officials, they've got a different perspective from where they're standing. I'll be the first one to admit I'll look at something and I say, man, that doesn't look right. They'll call one ball in and I'll go, it's the other way around. I walk up there and it's different. So the athletes can ask for a measurement. The athletes can also walk on the outside of the court up to the Polina and staying outside the court and look at it and see if they have a disagreement. And if they got a disagreement and they want a measurement, absolutely, they can ask for it. Now, obviously, some of our athletes are not going to be able to do that, but a lot of our athletes are quite capable of doing that.
Yeah, some do it too much, but that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, but that's yeah. Some of them do it too much, and we'll have to tackle that problem differently. That's where Kendall and her team have to then draw attention to the athlete, that they can't do that and delay the game.
Right.
I'm not sure who we have on tonight. Do folks want to introduce themselves in the last few minutes and say a word or two, if you want to? I've put up, as part of this slide deck, and Kendall will send this out to everybody, some resources where you can get them, and we'll attach the spreadsheet that I showed you earlier. I'll attach a blank sheet so that you can use it.
We have a question from Annette. Annette, I am unmuting your line now.
Okay. Hi, Rennie. I have a question for you about when you're talking about the drop. One of my athletes has a bad habit of she'll bring the Polina and bring up a ball with her, and before she'll throw the Polina, she'll actually drop the ball, the bocce ball. Is that okay for her to do that, or can that count against her?
Man, it's one of those tricky ones for me. To me, they haven't started playing and stuff. Polina hasn't been thrown, so I certainly, as a referee, would not call that a foul ball.
Okay.
My preference is they leave that ball back in the corner. That would be the right way to teach the athletes to do it.
Okay.
But obviously, what you got to be careful is if the athlete comes up with their ball and accidentally drop the ball. To me, it's a judgment call, but I've seen people say, nope, that's a foul ball. You just threw your ball.
Right.
So, once they have a hold of that ball, I wouldn't drop it as much as I put it down slowly so everybody can see that this is not a throw.
Right. I mean, she'll even do that sometimes on her second one. Been trying to break her of the habit because I've even been her unified partner. It's like, don't do that. But
yeah, and you may have some experience with this too. What would you do in your case? Because you've often refed at our position.
Right. Right. And I mean, as long as she doesn't go over the line with the ball, and I know what she's doing, she's just getting herself ready so she has the ball next to her so she can throw the plate and throw it. And it's not like she's dropping it over the line, so she's just getting it ready for herself.
Yeah. Sometimes there has to be some judgment calls. I think the rules would be pretty accurate in saying that's it. Competition, and in some situations, that's what would happen.
Okay.
So be careful. What I'm trying to say.
Okay. Thanks.
Does anyone else have anything that they would like to share? Any issues that you're running into at practice that you want Rennie's advice on? All right, I'll give you just a minute to think because there are 3 things that I would like to touch on. The first one, which I'm sure you all heard in the preseason webinar, is how important it is to have your forms in on time. Please do not have an athlete practicing if they do not have a medical on file. Same with the coach. We need their volunteer backgrounds and protected behaviors and concussion training. We're really cracking down on this just for the safety of our athletes. So if you could just work with us to make sure we have everything in, that would be great. The other big thing is using a ramp. So we do this for our interscholastic unified sports in indoor bocce and outdoor bocce. We've really pushed using ramps, and they are a great way to help an athlete who doesn't have the ability to really throw the ball far succeed in the sport of bocce. We're trying to move away from using the lighter weight balls. However, if you have an athlete who has been using lighter weight balls, we'll still allow that for this year. Just if you could attempt to use a ramp, or if you need any suggestions on how to build one or to find one, please let me know. I've been doing a lot of research on it, so there's some pretty cool stuff out there that could really help your program. And I know I had one more thing that I wanted to share, and it just completely slipped out of my mind. So when I think of it, I will follow up in an email with everyone. Rennie, do you have anything else that you want to touch on?
No. I thank you to everyone for taking the time out tonight. Hopefully, I've given you some new information over this.
Well, thank you, Rennie, for putting in all this work and for doing the training. So for everyone who attended the training tonight, we will be sending out just a short 5-question quiz that probably closer to the end of the week once we have that all finalized. So if you could just fill that out and send it back to me, I will make sure to update your certification status. And we did record the webinar tonight, so if there was anything that you wanted to go back on and listen to, I will make sure to send out the link to that in the morning. But with that being said, thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful night, and I'm really looking forward to summer games.
Thank you.